All right. So today we are starting our discussion with 2, which is the political institution in transition. And as I indicated the day we did a course review or course introduction, almost all our discussion will be captioned as in transition. In transition in the sense that we do not see what we are observing as in the change that we are observing as an end in itself. We see it as an event and is going to remain as a phase of an enterprise, just like the cliche goes. As the cliche goes, the only thing that is constant in this current world is change. And so we anticipate that even what we are discussing today, which might change tomorrow, right? And so we say in transition in the sense that the things may do change, right? So second, essentially, these are the kind of things. So we all know what the political institution is about. It is the institution that is responsible for maintaining law and order. It is the institution that ensures that the resources are somehow distributed equitably and your rights are observed, that of the others are also protected, especially the weak and the meek are all protected and what have you. So we talked about the era last semester where the key actors in this sphere was the chiefs and traditional authorities. We talked about areas where the chieftaincy institution is the very solid, organized, centralized, and then there are those that were not centralized but had its own way of ensuring what do you call it? Ensuring stability and protection of individuals' rights and liberties and what have you. So we talk about the centralized and then non-centralized political system, essentially, if you do remember. I'm currently at home. It is raining. So kindly give me a minute. I want to check to see my windows are locked. So I'll be back just in a minute. Thank you very much. I am back. Hello. All right. So having understood what the traditional political system was and how it functioned, we are going to look at what are the changes that have taken place since then. We will describe the changing roles that the chiefs currently play, because what we observe is that whilst the chief has lost many of his traditional functions, some still remain. And there's this whole discussion as to whether the chieftaincy institution is actually now relevant. We will look at all those discussions. And then what are the major changes that have also taken place since then? Right. So you see, if you are in such an environment, how are you going to learn with such a background? Position yourself properly, identify a place where you can study. And as Salah Stephanie, I mean, you are very destructive. I mean, essentially, if you are not talking, why don't you just mute yourself? And then when you want to talk, you unmute yourself, because you never know what probably might be happening. So please, let's all do that so we don't distract ourselves. All right, thank you very much. So we were looking at discuss the concept of local government. So in place of the changes that have taken place, okay, what are some of the institutions that are now taking the space or the vacuum that has been created? So we will look at the local government structure and what led to this whole idea of the local government structure and what have you. And then look at the various components. I'm sure if you have been monitoring the last 2-3 weeks, the names of the DCs and the MDCs, as well as the Metropolitan Assembly, municipal and metropolitan chief executives have been nominated. And we have been following the discussion that has been followed. Others are being confirmed and all that. So let's look at all those other things. So by way of the change that has taken place, if you remember, we said that the chieftaincy institution perform military functions, they perform religious functions, they perform judicial functions, they perform legislative and economic as well as cultural functions. One of the things that has taken place essentially is that many of these functions have been taken over. In fact, it started taking over during the colonial era. And it appears that post-colonial era, that change have continued. So one of the things we attribute this change to is the changes that came in the form of a law, what they call the native jurisdiction ordinances. And these were laws that were set up during the colonial era to guide and regulate the activities of the chiefs. So, and the people that were being colonized. That is why we talk about the native. So the rules apply to the people who were the original indigenes of the areas. And the jurisdiction then talks about what they can do and what they cannot do. And ordinance simply just means laws. What essentially these native jurisdiction ordinance did was to stipulate the rules that chiefs can play in the various colonies as well as the protectorates. And I'm sure by now you know the difference. You know the difference between the protectorate and the colony. The colony was initially those that have signed on to be regulated and governed by the colonial masters. The protectorates were more like areas that the administrators had certain control. It wasn't necessarily a colony, right? So, example, we are saying that kings were no longer to be called kings, some of the changes, because if you use the term king, essentially what it meant was that the king has the final say. But under the current, or under that regime, the chiefs actually didn't have the final say. They had some say, but the colonial administrators also had some say. And so they felt that you cannot connote or describe chiefs as kings. And so they were redesignated as chiefs, okay? And depending on how powerful or the jurisdiction that you occupy, you were either a sub-chief, you were a head chief, or that manner. How they went about some of them was to pull towns. Okay, so it's like they organized the society in the more centralized administrative system. How did they go about it? By creating what became known as the traditional councils. And these traditional councils currently stays with us. So you hear people talking about the Ghana Traditional Council, the Asante Traditional Council, and what have you. So it's like a hierarchical arrangement of the chieftaincy institution within a particular jurisdiction. How did they go about it? Towns or villages that were organized into districts. And for some of them, the districts have remained. Over time, some of them have been merged, some of them has been divided, depending on how the population as well as the economic resilience.
Sir, please, your line is breaking.
Okay, thank you.
Are you sure?
You know, sometimes you might think that it is the speaker's line, but unknown to you, it may be coming from your end. So let's try and all do our best. And I'm sure that is where the "are you sure" thing is coming from. But don't worry, just maintain your focus, listen to the interaction, ask the relevant questions. I hope that the breakup or the breaking is not coming from my end. Yes. And if it is so, you then, when you get the recordings and you are playing them back, you wouldn't have that challenge. So let's continue, please. So towns and villages were organized. Whoever spoke, I heard you. Right. So the point really is that so towns and villages were organized into districts. And how did they do it? Where the towns were found to be strong, okay, they were maintained as towns. Smaller areas were then aligned with neighbors to form bigger ones, okay, also to become the basis for the administrative districts. Traditional councils were then created where chiefs could discuss common problems and issues, right? there were also the forum of higher level chiefs. So you have the paramount chiefs, the regional, national, regional, as well as the national household chiefs. I mean, to cut the long story short, look at what we've done. I mean, majority of us are witnesses. And if you probably live within some jurisdiction, you probably might have participated in the referendum. So for example, we had the northern region, which happens to be a very big territory. It has been reorganized today, right? So that we now have the northeast and then we have the savannah, all being cut out from the traditional northern region. So of the northern region, you now have 3 different regions. So that is in a similar way, right? And some districts are, for example, being reorganized. Can you please mute your microphone? Unmute your microphone, please. You are distracting all of us. I don't want to. Okay. So that is how these things were done. And so depending on how your system is, you are either, the chief is either made a paramount chief or he's a sub-chief. I've already indicated that. And so in essence, what happens is that some chiefs lost their independence in every respect, right? Because like I said, they were not the ultimate decision makers because some decisions have to be clarified. So we say that the nature of the change was that the erosion of the chief's functions. They lost almost all their functions. If you remember, we have talked about the military, the religious, the judiciary functions, the administrative functions, the economics function, the legislative functions, as well as the cultural functions. They lost their military functions. So for example, chiefs could no longer raise an army of their own, neither can they wage war against another ethnic group. So that's very important. So the chiefs do no longer have control over the military. Again, they could make only laws that could at best be described as bylaws. So for example, chiefs can make laws as to how to go on a communal labor, what time wakekeepings, for example, can happen and what should go into wakekeeping, who is qualified to attend wakekeeping, and all those other bylaws, and not laws that may have legal implication. In fact, if you set up a law that is contradictory to the national law, that law is considered as ultra virus. In other words, it has no effect. It is unbinding. It cannot affect anybody, right? So they could not make certain laws. Administratively, the powers of managing and governing the territory has been taken over by the district assemblies, as well as their assembly members, and you all know. So if you see a chief who is trying to manage the development as well as the peace and stability of the area, he's only doing it on a ceremonial basis. In other words, his is more complementary. But the actual development and the maintenance of the district or the area is in the bosom of the district assembly and their respective assembly members and what have you. So they lost administrative function. Judiciary function, for example, before then the chiefs had their own courts, okay, which were established. They had their own prisons where people who faulted could be punished. They have their own police, which can go and arrest offenders and dealt with them. But with the colonial courts, as well as our modern form of courts, all these functions that traditionally were performed by the chiefs are no longer expected to be performed by the chief. Yes, chiefs may do some bit of mediation within their jurisdiction. In fact, majority of the decisions that they would take are more like administrative and not legal. And so some of the decisions that they take may not even be binding. If, for example, the chief summons you and you can refuse to go, and the chiefs have no power, even though legally speaking, the chiefs do not have any power to arrest you. But you see, traditionally, the chiefs also wield certain authority that they can excommunicate you, and the fear and the respect and the reverence that the chief is given to you are, even though legally you are not obliged, you are emotionally and strategically bounded to respond. And that is why people will still respond to the chief when they call. So the chiefs, yes, they can settle dispute between husband and wife, dispute between a man and a wife, dispute between neighbors and friends and all those other things. And they use usually traditions, and by virtue of the fact that the chief is respected, people will begin then to accede to him. Essentially, the chief also lost their economic monopoly over some important trade as well as route. So for example, currently, by the constitution that we are running now, any natural resource found within the territories of Ghana is said to be entrusted to the president in trust for the people. So if you found cocoa, if you found gold in my bedroom today, automatically it becomes the property of the state. It is only the president who can give me the go-ahead to mine that gold. Yes, I can mine it so long as I am not caught, but when I'm caught, it becomes a crime. And so all those economic resources that make certain chiefs very powerful economically are no longer with the chiefs. And so they have to fall on other state institutions. Again, some chiefs also became very powerful because their community were more like a means to another community. So they could toll those routes or routes. So if you want to pass through my town, you pay a levy, and the chiefs then use those levies and became. But now chiefs are forbidden to toll, okay, certain route or routes and what have you, and the rest. So essentially, of the 6 functions that we talked about, the military, the religious, the judiciary, the administrative, the economic, as well as the cultural, only the 2 cultural and religious functions appears to be somewhat intact. So the chiefs are still seen as the custodians of the culture and traditions of the community for which they superintend. Even the way chiefs are selected by still following the traditional criteria that you have to hail from a royal family, you must have shown some cultural traits and what have you, still makes the cultural function of the chief still somehow intact. Religious-wise, we also say that the chief is still considered as the chief priest of the community that he represents. He's seen as the spiritual head of the community, and that is why he's the only one who occupies the ancestral stool and can access the ancestral stoolhouse and all those other things. And certain things, it's generally deemed that the chief has a better relationship with the ancestors and serves as an intermediary between his people and those ahead of him who have died and are now constituted or described as ancestors. Any question up to this stage? If you have a question, kindly indicate, and then I'll give you access to ask those questions. If not, so I said that in terms of all the 6 functions, is the cultural functions as well as the religious functions that seemingly appears to be intact. The rest appears depleted, has been either taken over by other state institutions, or even that they might have lost their relevance. So the question that sometimes we'll be asking ourselves, if all these changes have taken place, then can we really say that the chieftaincy institution is still relevant? Right, because somebody will ask that the 2 that appears to have remained are generally ceremonial. They do not necessarily make you a chief, because if you cannot make laws, if you cannot punish or sanction your people, if you cannot hold custody of certain economic values, resources, then of what use are you as a leader of the economic community? Now, almost all the things I discussed with you happens to apply to those centralized political system. And I'm sure you understand the centralized political system, where we talk about where the chieftaincy and its structures are. But those that did not have centralized, what happened to them? Again, this is what happened. New political functionaries were created. So for example, among the Namus, whose positions were more political, were made chiefs. So even among the non-centralized system, they just elevated somebody and created a chieftaincy, a chief out of the system. Okay. Clinton, I don't know what you mean by indirect rule, aka slavery or puppet. I don't still understand, because it is not just about the colonial era. It is also the current regime that we are operating in that I'm making reference to. Yes, the processes of change began during the colonial era, but even currently, as it is now, it is what it is. The chiefs do not have so much powers as originally held. Some of their powers have been taken over because we claim that we are Republican. And if the Republican system does not necessarily even recognize the chieftaincy institution, but in Ghana, we have somehow managed to keep the chieftaincy institution somehow relevant. And even the political system sometimes make them so. So for example, over the weekend, we knew the president was in Ashanti region. He first have to go and pay homage to the Ashanti king to receive his go-ahead and to inform him that he is in his territory. And for the next 3 days or 4 days, he will be touring part of the jurisdiction. It is ceremonial in code, because with or without the consent of the chief of Ashanti or anywhere, the president can go anywhere, but it's just right, okay, to do that. And such acts, tacitly or indirectly, project the chieftaincy institution as also important and what have you. The Tindanas, who were considered more powerful also among than the Namus, okay, but were not, because you see, the Tindanas were more like the spiritual leaders of the group. They were custodians of the land. They were more like the spiritual heads, but did not show any political stature, okay? We're not given any position, because the Namus appear more organized in terms of political system, leadership and all that. So the people just elevated them, they make them the chiefs. And for some of these areas, it still continuously creates tension, because if the Tindanas, who were deemed as the original inhabitants of the area, were suddenly made to become subjects by virtue of a system that was alien to them, then these things did happen. I mean, even among the Gans, though questionable, the Gans originally didn't have a chieftaincy system that appears centralized, right? The leader, the spiritual head of the Gans, the Ulome, were more of the leaders, right? But as it stands now, the Ulome's have also positioned as kind of somehow been overshadowed by the chiefs which have emerged from the various clans, the way, right? And all that. And people think that that's also explain why there's so much unresolved chieftaincy disputes in and around the Greater Accra region and other parts of the country where the Gans are there. All right. If there are no questions, I can continue. So I've asked you this question again: is the chieftaincy institution still relevant in modern Ghana? I mean, it's for you to think about. How is our politics or governance of our communities and societies now? Now we talk about the Ghanaian political system. The first one, the modern political system that we have, is that we have what we call the central government system, which appears to be in the form of a hybrid. And this thing I don't need to explain because you all know this. You did this in social studies, so you know. Because globally, there are two streams of central government system, the presidential and the parliamentary system. Ghana seems to have blended two, especially under the Fourth Republic. Historically, when Nkrumah was first elected, and that is why he was called a prime minister, because we had, and prime minister was usually what we call the leader of parliament, right? Leader of the people's representative. So in most cases, the prime minister happens to be a member of parliament, is the leader of the parliament side, okay? Then we have the presidential system where the president is elected by the general population, all right? But one of the cardinal principles why we say that there's a hybrid is that in the typical presidential system, even though in Ghana we vote for the president directly, there's supposed to be what we call clear separation of powers. So those who are into legislative business do not have anything to do with the president and those who hold executives. But in Ghana, you have MPs also serving as executive members. And that's actually where the hybrid system then comes in. So you have the central administration, which represented by the president and the ministers, having a very close work ethics. In fact, some MPs becoming executive members, some MPs becoming members of boards and all those other things. In a purely parliamentary system, MPs cannot be members of the executives, but in this Ghana, we do it. And then we have the second tier, which is the local government system, where the governments or the governance and the development within a particular locality, okay, within a particular locality appear or is always shared or governed by the people within such enclaves, okay? So depending on the size, the population, as well as the economic value of that area, you either have a DC, you have an MC, or you have a metropolitan, who are now wrongfully been describing themselves as mayors. Right? In Ghana, by our system, the district chief executives are not elected by the people. They are actually appointed by the president. And so they are more like the leader or the president's representative in the various areas. We currently have about 250 or 60, but the numbers keep changing almost every time, of such districts, right? And the assembly members then meet and approve. And that is actually what is happening currently, right? So what is this thing that we are talking about? The act that governs it is what we refer to as the Law 207. Okay, the main objective was to see how government can be dispersed to the local level so that the individual people can manage it. Is that okay? The next thing that I want to also touch on is that essentially these system is said to be three-tier. Three-tier in the sense that you have what we call the regional coordinating council, then you have the district assemblies and the area councils and unit committees, or what is popularly known as the TACUC. Okay, now what is this whole structure all about? So one, you know, the president will appoint a regional minister. So the regional minister, including his regional directors, will come together and that's what we call the Regional Coordinating Council. Second level is the various districts. So for example, Ashanti region may have about 40 or 45 districts. When they all come together, they constitute the Regional Coordinating Council. But when the individual 40 assemblies then meet, they have what we call the district assemblies, who constitute the district assembly. And then within the bigger district, there's also the town and the area council or the unit. So at every unit point that you find yourself, you are being represented. So we have the unit committee members, and usually they will select like 5 people that are supposed to plan for the area that you live. And then of the 5, 1 is usually elected as the assembly member and what have you. Majority of us since 1992 have shown very little interest in the district assembly election or the assemblyman election, with the exception of the very small communities, because they actually then see the relevance of these things. And sometimes it becomes a very huge contest between some communities, because every community then expects that they will have their representative there. Victor Brighter, sorry, your hand is up. I'm going to allow you to, so you can unmute yourself and ask your question. Victor Brighter, sorry, yes, ask your question. I can hear you.
When teaching the modern system of governance, you made mention of the presidential system and the parliamentary system. And then in Ghana, the parliamentary system ended after Nkrumah became the first president. Because according to my understanding on parliamentary system, it's a system where we have the
Unfortunately, your line appears to have broken. I cannot hear you. I don't know if your colleagues can hear you. Right. It actually didn't end with Nkrumah. It actually didn't end with Nkrumah, because Busia also served under the Third Republic. Actually, was also was Busia. No, the Second Republic was also a parliamentary system, because Busia was never a president; he was a prime minister, right? So, but obviously the first phase of Nkrumah's regime was a parliamentary system. Yes. So that case, you are right. Okay. You can come back if you still have a, because we didn't hear the last part of his comment. I don't know whether he's the one whose line has dropped. Okay, so let's continue. If he has another question, anybody has another question, you can give me an indication, I'll let you do. So this is what, as I said, so the Regional Coordinating Council consists of the regional ministers. In fact, in the past, we had deputy ministers, but since 2021, we have abandoned the deputy ministers portfolio. But historically, we have always had a deputy ministers, at least under the Fourth Republic. Currently, we do not have deputy regional ministers, but it is there, just so you know what has happened. Then we have all the district secretaries, right, or what we call the DCs now. So we have the regional minister, okay, government appointed person as the chairman. So he's always, and I mean, he also doubles as the regional coordinator for security. They call them the RECSEC, okay, in charge of security and all of you. What are their roles? Their roles include coordination and formulation of integrated plans and programs of the district assemblies in order to harmonize these programs with the national development policy approved by the government. What essentially am I saying? So every region has a number of districts. And since majority of you are not very familiar with the district, let me rather use the constituency just for illustrative purposes. So for example, if you come to Greater Accra, I think Greater Accra has about 31 constituencies, right? So you can talk about the Krowo, you can talk about the Ladade Kotopon, you can talk about Madina, you can talk about Denton, you can talk about where we are, I mean, main campus is Ayawaso Ogon, where city campus is Osuklote, right? And all that. All of them have a particular geographical place that they represent. So Osuklote will plan for Osuklote, right? La will plan for La. Amasaman will plan for Amasaman. Trobo will plan for Trobo and what have you. What the regional minister or the regional coordinating council then will do is to bring all these 31 districts or constituencies together, right? Then they coordinate and formulate an integrated plan so that he will then champion it to the national level. And based on that, the national development policy then will be harmonized. So for example, the president then declares 2021 as the year of roads. And they will be asked to, okay, every district should submit priority areas for planning. Maybe in terms of, because one government cannot afford to do all roads, they will say, okay, maybe Greater Accra region, we are giving you 20,000 kilometers of road. But you have over 1,000 or 100 million or 1 million kilometers of road that needs to be done. It becomes the regional coordinating council's responsibility to then coordinate to say, okay, you give Amasaman 5 kilometers. Let's give Osu 2 kilometers. Let's give Amasaman this, let's give Amasaman. They harmonize all these things and take it to the level. Government say we are doing one district, one factory. The minister cannot know all the districts and the lands and their priorities. So the DCs will bring all their priorities. Okay, as for us, in Amasaman, maybe the district we can do because we are doing, and if you listen to the discussion I had with you, the video that your class 12 is supposed to make available, when I was teaching the economic, I talked about the whole concept about industrialization and what have you. So that discussion, okay, we can do this because this is the resource that we have, and they do all that. And so that is what we mean by the coordination and all that. The network reception was very bad, so it kicked me out of the class. Sorry, Victor, we always have a way back, right? So any question? If not, I want to move to the next level. So I've also talked about it. The district assemblies, they consist of the DCs, MCs, who is a government appointee. I've said that. 2/3 of them happen to be elected members. So we'll talk about assembly members and whatever. And 1/3 are members appointed or nominated by government in consultation with the local traditional authorities. So when these people meet, then they will confirm who the president has nominated, like I said. And then the DC then becomes in charge of the development, security, and everything within the district. They also have a whole system where they have the district director of almost everything. So if you go there, you have a district director of agriculture, district director of education, district commander of the police service, whatever of the army, if they have an army base, and all those other things that matter in that. So you see it there. What is essentially the functions of the district assemblies? I've said that they are more like the president representative. So like they are the president of the district, essentially. They are supposed to see to the overall development of the districts and ensuring the preparation and submission of development plans and budget to the government for approval. I have already discussed this with you. They also formulate their own strategies for effective mobilization of both the human, the physical, financial, and other resources. So it's actually the district assemblies to know the needs of the society, plan towards getting it done, and also the resources that is available. Do they have teachers? Do they have schools? Do they have banks? Do they have any other thing? It becomes the district assembly. Unfortunately, in this country, I think even though the concept of the district assembly was a laudable idea, we haven't been able to maximize it, utilize it properly to the point where we can maximize the best output from it. That is why, even though MPs are generally not the development agent, but I guess also because the MPs are elected directly by the people, they go to the people, they campaign on certain promises, and so people then feel like, if anything, they are the best place to go to get their issues resolved, right? And instead of the district assemblies, whose mandate it is to plan the development of the district, build the roads, build the schools, build the markets, make sure that schools are well functioning and all those other things, right? So they are supposed to, the engagement of trade, industry, and commerce for development, every resources. So look at the resources. We are talking about human resources. We are talking about physical resources. We are talking about the financial and other resources. I mean, since I became an adult, I've never seen my assembly ever come to the community to even assess our needs and priorities, right? But essentially, they are supposed to have a district directorate to see how many teachers do we have in the districts, how many schools do we have in the district. They are supposed to have all that. Even though the census data is supposed to be helpful, and again, the census data, for example, is supposed to be distributed into the various districts. So if I go to where I live, I should be able to have a clear distinction as to who I have in my district, right? Because the district needs these things to plan. And in the absence of it, it becomes very difficult for the district to plan. And I think that's also very important, and we need to take note of that so that if we have an opportunity to engage and listen and discuss, you are informed in how these things can be done. They are also supposed to maintain public works, as I said. So if the schools are not working, if there are no teachers, it is the district assembly's responsibility. And that is why they have district directors for almost everything. District directors for works and housing, district directors for almost everything that you need to think of. They have directors for them. They are the district engineers. So for example, if there are flood happening in your area, it shouldn't be the president, it shouldn't be the MP. It should be your district, because the engineer's job is to ensure that the demarcations are observed. But they are all sitting at their offices. They are not doing the work that they are supposed to do. Some will tell you that we don't even have engineers. Some years they don't have the technical people. Some people are refusing to go to the district because the district itself needs development. There are no place to live, there are no offices and all those other things, right? They are supposed to cooperate with the national security to provide security for the district. They are supposed to see to the construction and rehabilitation of new social development infrastructure. So my road hasn't been done, my gutters haven't been done, there are no sanitation areas, there are no playground and all that. It becomes the work of the district assembly. So essentially, what have I been saying? We are saying that colonialism is actually the main source of the change that we have observed within the political institution. The traditional polity, which we all discussed in last semester, is made up of the chiefs, the heads of lineage, okay? And all these people have been directly affected by virtue of the change. The powers of the chief have been reduced. The control that they have, both economically, politically, administratively, legislatively, as well as judiciary, has been curtailed. In place of that, there has been other resource institutions, like the central political system, being the presidential governance, hybrid governance, or parliamentary system that we have had over time, the colonial administration that we have had over time, playing that role, and this seems to have continued over the period, right? New institutions have been created, right? And then we have the new local government structure that appears to draw development closer to the people in the governance of their society. If there are questions, I would like to take them because we still have some few minutes. So let me grant you guys the opportunity to unmute yourself, and then we can continue with our discussion. If you have a question, kindly unmute yourself. I'll ask you to speak, and then we will do that. Yes, quickly, who wants to? Yes. If you don't have a question, I'll ask the question.
Sir. Hello, sir. Hello, sir. I don't know if. Hello, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir, please. My question is that you said that the district assembly is the one in charge of all the projects in our environment, like wherever in our district.
Communities, actually, yes.
Sorry. So, if the district assembly is not doing its work well, how do we ensure that they do their jobs well, or who do we go to? Because if they are the ones in charge and then they are not doing anything for us, how do we ensure that they do it? Since I don't know if are we to go to the MPs or I don't know.
All right. I mean, I think that's a very good question, and I'll respond to that. So there's a conversation currently. So I mean, let's get it this way: the ultimate power resides with the president. You know that. Good. And so when the president, who has the ultimate power, is not doing his work well, what do? We vote them out, right? Good. Unfortunately, in the case of the district chief executives, because we do not directly appoint them or vote for them or elect them, it becomes an issue. And that's one of the lacuna that currently appears to be hanging on our neck. So in 2019 or 2019, the president took a bill to Parliament. And the bill sought to do two things. The first one was to make the position of the district chief executive elective, so that the people living in the district would then vote for who they want to be their district chief executive. In the same way, we vote for our president and vote for the MP, whose main job, the MP, whose main job is to make laws and to represent your voice and your views in the chamber of legislation. Unfortunately, that one can't just be done because it is what we call in the Constitution entrenched provision. Entrenched provisions are provisions that requires majority vote to overturn. So for example, you need about 50% of the people who are registered to vote to show up, and about 75% of them must agree to do that. But when the president took the bill to Parliament, what they sought to do was to make it partisan so that the various political parties can then file for the office of the DC to be elected. Unfortunately, in the House of Legislation, there was a division, and the bill was suspended, so the referendum was not done. If you ask me, one of the best ways to ensure that people who occupy some of these positions are accountable, so that if they are not doing their work, we can hold them accountable, is for us to make those people's position to be elected. So that if he knows that after 4 years he's not delivered on his promises, he can be sacked by the people. Because for some of them, I mean, so just look at it, some areas, just 18 people decide whether that person who has been nominated by the president is accepted or not. And some of the revelation that is coming out currently is so terrible. So if you have money, you can easily buy 18 people. And some of them have been telling us that they've been receiving 3,000 each, just so they will confirm the DCE. Some have confirmed that as far back 10, 12 years ago, they paid 500 cedis each, which indirectly tells you that all of them have been bribing their way for approval, right? And so once they have been bribed their way into approval, it becomes very difficult for we, the individuals, to have a say, because at the end of the day, it's just the 18 people who can decide that they don't want the DCE. And if it is 18 people, we can always fix them, right? And until or the president, who has no oversight, direct presence in the district, will then decide to say that this person is not representing my interest, so he is going. So I understand your question. The question is that as it stands now, the only way to get your DCE who is not performing is to sack the president. Because when the president loses, that DCE automatically will lose his seat. But sometimes you are unable to vote the president out because maybe that president is actually doing exactly what he is supposed to do as the president. And unfortunately, in your confirmation of the president, that individual who has been underperforming, right, automatically get the chance to continue again. My prescription is that we should make the position of the district chief executive an elective position. I don't agree with the argument that it is also doing you are going to partisan the local level development. I mean, if I have the sense to elect the president who holds almost everything else in his hands, then what difference that does a common district chief executive will make in my life? That when he is elected on a party, in any case, even while he's not elected on a partisan basis, we all know that the people who are nominated and approved are partisan people. We know them. We know that if you are not a member of the MPP currently, you will never become a DCE. Because the MPP are those, in fact, this year, something interesting also happened. The MPP decided to set up a regional vetting committee to vet the people who were interested in becoming the DCE in their various districts. And based on your party membership, your contribution in support of the party and your belief in the party, you were either recommended or not. And so where is that hypocrisy? It is already partisan. In fact, we can decide that even at the common assembly membership that we vote for, we all know that they campaign on the parties sponsor them, and we haven't died. My assemblyman who won, I know his party affiliation. He's a key member of the party. He attends his meeting. In fact, some of them are even executives of the parties. And so if you ask me, my position is that I think we should move away from this hypocrisy. We are already partisan, we know. Even in the security service, we know the MPP police and we know the NDC police. So what makes us think that by allowing partisan people to contest at a DC for us to, at least that one gives an opportunity to know who I'm voting for. I can decide to vote for the DCE on party A, vote for the MP on party B, and for the president on party A. And things probably may work for me because that is how the system works. Any other question, please, Mariam? I hope you are answered.
Yes, sir. Says so. Last question. So does that mean that a district chief executive goes wrong, you can't report him to the MP because the MP was elected?
No. In fact, listen, the DCE is not accountable to the MP. The DCE is not accountable to the MP, not one bit. In fact, in reality, sorry. In fact, in reality, at a point in time, the MP is rather accountable to the MP, to the assembly. In fact, there are some districts that have 2 constituencies in them. Do you get it? And the district, the DC, there's the common fund, the money that is given to every district to fund economic activities and development activities in the district. A portion of that money is to be given by from the district to the MP. And sometimes the DCs will use that money to actually discipline the MPs. You can hold on to your money. Because even the act says that even you, the MP, you cannot directly manage the fund. The only thing is that you have a say as to how that portion of your fund, of the fund, it should be used. And in the DC, so for example, you can decide, okay, I want to use it to do national health insurance registration for my members. And the DC will probably write a check for you, or organize the mass registration and pay for them on your behalf. Or I want to rehabilitate some roads or some chip compound somewhere from my my allocation of the district assembly common fund, right, and all that. So to some extent, because I mean, seriously, the MPs are not development agents, it's the districts. And so if you antagonized the DCE, and he's the type who has an ambition of becoming an MP, he will sabotage you and make you unpopular. So next time, especially if you are on different party lines, so you are an NDC MP, and he is a DC who is affiliated to the MPP, he can sabotage you in anticipation that next time he will rather be treated favorably. And if you have been observing, sometimes the district chief executives, especially in areas where the sitting MP happens to be a member of the opposition, they use their office as a way of campaigning. And most of the times, it's the DCs who contest the sitting opposition MPs. And so there's always this antagonism between them. Right. Okay, thank you. Any other question, please? Any other question? If there are no other questions, then I will call off the class and make these lectures also available to you. I think, so you are likely to get 3 recordings this week, because I've given you the economy in transition. I'm making this one that I've done with you available. And then we also have the family institution, the family and the marriage institution also available. So all in all, you are going to have like 4 recordings for the past 3 weeks, and that should suffice for the first 3 weeks. If there are questions, as usual, my email is available. You can send me a mail and I'll be willing to respond to it. If there are no questions, then let's have a good week. So I'm going to make this one readily available. Then I'll make the family one available on Friday. So you have enough. Go through them. If you have questions, you can send me a mail on Sakai or any other thing, and then I'll be glad to respond. Have a good week. Thank you.